I'm Bhante Sujato. We're doing some teachings from the Buddha that reference animals and meditation. And the first time we started was with the lion's roar, mainly because last night the lions were roaring. And so we thought that would be a suitable place to start. And the Buddha talks about how when the lion roars, it terrifies all the other beasts in the forest. So just a bit of backdrop. When the Buddha was teaching, the Buddha was a very observational teacher. He would see the things that were around him and he would point to those things, sometimes literally pointing to those things, and then he would always find a metaphor or a simile to go with that thing. And so he was constantly observing maybe nature, the animals, the plants, also the people and what the people were doing, people's different livelihoods and so on. And he would always find some kind of way of connecting it with the Dhamma. And one of the things about the Buddha's use of metaphors, like there are many things which we find in the Suttas and in the Buddha's teachings that I find has this rather peculiar quality. And I'm not sure that I can really capture that quality, but the quality, I'll try to express it to say it's a quality of a quiet aptness. That many of the things that the Buddha says, they don't necessarily immediately leap out at you. You know, many things maybe sound quite straightforward. And yet, but when you go through many of them and you live with the Buddha's teachings for a long time, you realize how powerful that his mastery of speech was, that the similes are exactly right every time. But he makes it look easy. Like when he gives those teachings, it makes it sound, it sounds like, it has that quality of being like it was there forever. Like he's just picked up the simile that was just around him. But actually it comes from his genius that he's able to express himself in this way, not just once or twice, but hundreds or thousands of times. And each time he finds exactly the right simile to express himself. And if you think it's easy, try it. And if you've ever given public speaking, you know, it's actually quite hard, right? And you actually, you know, maybe you're thinking, oh, this concept's a bit unclear, you know, maybe I'll find some metaphor to help. And you're sort of looking around and so on, and it's not easy to find a good one. But for the Buddha, he would always have exactly the right metaphor. Now, given our experiences last night, did you enjoy the soundtrack last night? Okay, here is the Buddha. The roar of the lion is, of course, such an amazing sound and was used many times by the Buddha in similes. And this is a particularly memorable one. Mendicants, towards evening, so this is from, if you want to look it up, this is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Anguttara 4.33. This is the lion. Mendicants, towards evening, the lion, king of beasts, emerges from his den, yawns, looks all around the four directions, and roars his lion's roar 3 times. Then he sets out on the hunt. And the animals who hear the roar of the lion, king of beasts, are typically filled with fear, awe, and terror. They return to their lairs, be they in a hole, the water, or a wood, and the birds take to the air. Even the royal elephants, bound with strong harnesses in the villages, towns, and capital cities, break apart their bonds and urinate and defecate in terror as they flee here and there. That's how powerful is the lion, king of beasts among animals, how illustrious and mighty. In the same way, when a realized one arises in the world, perfected, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy, knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened, blessed, he teaches the Dhamma. Such is identity. Such is the origin of identity. Such is the cessation of identity. Such is the practice that leads to the cessation of identity. So here the Buddha is comparing his teaching with the roar of the lion's roar, which is this is like a kind of a almost like a standard trope that the Buddha uses. So to roar the lion's roar is not merely an expression of the Buddha's teachings, but it's an expression of the Buddha's teaching in its boldness, that he would express his teaching with such confidence. Now, this particular teaching is on what I've translated here as identity. So I should just note that all of the translations that I'll be reading today will be from my translations of the four Nikayas, or from our translations of the Pali Suttas, which of course are on Sutta Central. So I'm translating the word here, identity, and this is a technical term in Buddhism, and the technical term is Sakkaya. And Sakkaya is a very specialized term, but essentially what it means is to identify and be attached to, conceive yourself as one or other of the five aggregates. All right, so you conceive yourself in terms of the five aggregates, which then begs the question, what are the five aggregates? Well, the five aggregates are five sets of phenomena, five sets of things that we commonly take to be ourself. Our body, number one. Feelings, okay, perceptions, choices, and consciousness, right? Five aggregates. And so this is commonly used by the Buddha as a way of analysing how we form attachment. So one of the primary forms of attachment that we have is the attachment to our body. And so we like our bodies to be healthy. We don't like them to be unhealthy. We like our bodies to look nice. We don't like them to look ugly. We like our bodies to keep on living is another big one, and not to have our heads bitten off by lions, for example. And so we have this attachment to our body that manifests in many different ways. But our attachment is not just to our body, because what happens then is that we tend to see that bodies, for all our attachment to them, they get old, they get sick, and eventually they die. And there doesn't seem to be anything that we can do about that. Some of the welcome, just in time. Good to see you. Yeah, no. It's good to see you. Good you can make it. So there are some people who think that they can make our physical bodies immortal. So this is, you still find it today, just like in the Buddha's day. The means maybe is different, but some people think you can extend your lifespan by various means, right? Including like some of the sort of tech people like to drink the blood of the young. Like that's an actual thing. If you're into that, I guess. Others think that we can, some people are looking a bit puzzled. Yes, no, it really is a thing. Other people think that you can become immortal by uploading your consciousness to the cloud. Right? You know who doesn't think that? Is IT admins who manage the cloud servers. Am I wrong? And so we tend to think, this is some magic thing and so on, we could put it, but if you're running a cloud server, you're like, no, please don't do that. There's a lot of suffering in the cloud, right? I mean, just imagine it, right? Okay, so first of all, upload your consciousness to the cloud, great. Somebody, without a doubt, has left the password as password. Right? And then it's going to be hacked. So somebody's going to have the source code of your brain, your mind, and suddenly you're going to start remembering events differently than you did before, and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, so this is fraught, to say the least. So, but this is that thing, that these are all different forms of attachment to the body. So attachment to the body doesn't just mean necessarily this particular physical body. Other people are attached to their DNA, right? They think that they can be preserved by their DNA. Some people want to freeze their bodies, right? So it can be revived in the future. All of these things. None of them have the benefit of actually working, but these are the kinds of things. So when you sort of get through this and all of the different kinds of attachment to the body, then what happens is that because you can see the dangers in that, you attach maybe to your feelings, because the feeling's a bit more subtle. So you get attached to that happy feeling that you have, right? And maybe this this is what people think, right? They think that, I feel this happiness. I want that happiness to last. And they think, when I die, I just want to go to heaven and just have happiness all the time. Right? I mean, it's not unreasonable. Yeah? I just want to be happy all the time. But when you look at how happiness works, it's not quite as easy as that, is it? Because whenever we experience feelings, we always experience some happiness, then some sadness, and also some nothing, sometimes when we just don't feel anything. And that seems to be, that's like, how can we say we're going to go to a world, like all the feelings we've ever experienced have been like that. So how can we go to a world where everything is just going to be happy all the time? People aren't always attached to happiness, I should mention. Some people are attached to sadness. Sadness can be very nice. Yeah? And sadness can be bound up with your sense of self, your sense of identity. I know who I am because I'm sad. It's better to feel sad than to feel nothing. But then there are other people who are also attached to feeling nothing, just to having blankness. And that also, because then you can be afraid to feel something. Yeah? That also can be another form of attachment. So these are all different forms of that attachment to feeling, which is the second form of identity. Right? Perception is another one. Right? So our perception is our idea of who we are. Right? So I can have a perception of myself as a monk, or perception of myself as whatever, and this also can be another thing that we get attached to. We can be attached to a nation, we can be attached to a gender, we can be attached to like a job or political identity, and then we can get very challenged when people don't respect that. So this is another form of attachment to perception, attachment to choices. So especially when we get older, right? So one of the signs of maturity is the ability to make choices. Right? So when kids are young, we don't necessarily expect them to make choices, or we only really let them make choices in kind of limited areas, right? Because if we give them a choice, you can eat whatever you want, then they're only eating dessert, and that's not going to do well for very long. So we give kids limited choice, but as people grow up, we expect people to have the wisdom to be able to make choices, and people start to identify with that. I am the decider. Yeah? I am the decider. I always remember that line because that was a quote from, I think, George Bush, the younger Bush, and it was an interesting line because they were going to war and they were doing all of these things, and he'd be saying, "I am the decider." And he's like President of the United States. But somehow he felt the need to remind people that he was the one making decisions. I don't know if you remember, but around that time everybody was saying, it was Cheney, it was Rumsfeld, it was all the people behind the scene who's making the decisions. And so he had a very powerful father figure, right? So he's having to escape from his father figure, and even though he's actually president, he still felt so insecure and so defensive that he had to remind people, oh, I'm the disciple, I'm the one making decisions. But that's what we get attached to, isn't it? Yeah? I'm the one who makes the decisions. And so especially as we get older, that becomes a thing. We have to make decisions. And we have to take responsibility for them. But at the same time, if we get too attached to them, then that becomes another form of suffering. And then the final form of attachment, the most subtle form of attachment, is attachment to consciousness. And what this means primarily is the attachment to the subtle states of clear awareness that we realize in meditation. Again, this is a part of evolution and growth. And as human beings, we have the opportunity to meditate. Not everybody meditates, of course, but we have the opportunity to meditate. And when we meditate, our mind changes. Not just what you think about. Right? That changes, yes, but not just that. Not just how you perceive. Yes, how you perceive changes, but that's not all. Not just even like how you feel, your emotions. They change, yes, but not just that changes. What changes is your awareness itself. The quality of how you know things changes. And there comes a time when you're in your meditation and you realize that for your whole life, it's as if you were driving around in a car with a muddy windshield. And then finally, you've cleaned it. And you can actually see. And you're like, have I been driving around for years like this without even realizing what it's like to see? And the way that you are aware becomes more clear. And that means that everything is better. Everything you feel, everything you taste has more taste. Everything you see more clearly. Everything that you think more clearly. Every idea you have is more clear. Every memory you have. Because it's not any of those things. It's the thing that's inside all of those things. It's the consciousness of your memories, the consciousness of your thoughts, the consciousness of your sights and sounds and tastes and touch and smells and all of the things that make up our experience. And that becomes purified through meditation. When I'm talking about this, it's not something which you should think is esoteric or strange or only to be attained. I'm not talking about enlightenment or anything like that. I'm talking about just very simple things. Simple things that you will have noticed if you've meditated even one time. For example, if you meditate and after a little while you feel an itch and you want to scratch the itch. You've had itches your entire life and you never paid any attention to them. Or you might just scratch it or something like that. But when you meditate, suddenly you're far more aware of that than you were before. Or maybe it's something that you've forgotten. Maybe you were supposed to have a meeting or you're supposed to buy something or whatever, and you sit down to meditate 5 minutes later, then you remember, oh yeah, that thing. Yeah? Or so many times that comes to you. Or maybe there's a problem that you have. A problem from work or something and you're trying to solve, and then you sit and you meditate. And then in the middle of your meditation, then it just comes to you. Oh yeah, that's what I do. And when that happens, it has this quality to it that the answer was there all along. You already knew, actually. But now your mind is clear and you can see the answer. So these things happen all the time in meditation. And I'm just talking about ordinary, simple meditation that we might do. A little bit later, we'll sit here for 20 minutes, and something like this will happen to everyone here. This is not an esoteric or an unusual phenomenon. It's a normal part of the meditation process, and it's a sign. It's what we call a nimitta in Pali, right? Nimitta isn't just a big bright light in meditation. Nimitta means a sign. This is a sign to you It's an indication that your hindrances are starting to get quieter and your mind is starting to get clearer. Yeah? Just a little bit. But even just that little bit, you'll see that it makes a difference. Yeah? It is really amazing how much just a different little bit of mindfulness can make in awareness. I mean, just to sort of quantify it, think about how these days we penalize drink driving. Right? If you even have just a couple of drinks, you go over the limit. Why? Because the police know that even a couple of drinks reduces your mindfulness enough to make it measurably more dangerous. But to you, that's hardly anything, right? You still feel fine, right? You had a couple of drinks, it hardly affects you at all. But still, it's enough to actually change the quality of your awareness. That's what we're talking about. So through meditation is like the inverse. So we're improving the quality of our awareness. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the identifying with that. So if you get attached to that, right? You get attached to that idea, I am the meditator. I am the one with a pure mind. Right? I am the one who knows. Then this is that last form of identity, the last form of attachment to the idea of self. And everyone will do it. Don't worry, it's normal. But we just have to let go of it like we let go of everything else. All right. So, just to return to our sutta. So that's just a bit of a backdrop on the questions of identity that Buddha is bringing up here. So just as the lion roars and terrifies all the creatures in the forest, there's a couple of gentlemen here. Are they coming to the seminar or not sure? Not expecting anyone. Anyway, they're welcome to come if they're around. Yeah. Okay, so, and here the Buddha is using this idea of identity or sakkaya in the framework of the Four Noble Truths. So, the sakkaya, the identity, the origin, the cessation, and the practice that leads to the cessation of identity, which of course is the Noble Eightfold Path. And here's where the Buddha is now applying this simile. Now, there are gods who are long-lived, beautiful, and very happy, lasting long in their divine palaces. Okay? So again, we heard about identity and about attachment to identity. So these are beings who are born in these places that are where they live for a long time, and they're beautiful and happy. They've got everything they could possibly want. So they've got all of the fruits of their attachment to their identity. But when they hear this teaching by the realized one, they're typically filled with fear, awe, and terror. Oh no, it turns out we're impermanent, though we thought, it turns out we're impermanent, though we thought we were permanent. It turns out we don't last, though we thought we were everlasting. It turns out we're transient, though we thought we were eternal. It turns out that we're impermanent, not lasting, transient, and within identity. That's how powerful is the realized one in the world with its gods, how illustrious and mighty. And then the Buddha finishes this off with some verses, or I should say rather the text finishes off with some verses. The Buddha, the teacher without a peer in the world with its gods, rolls forth the wheel of Dhamma from his own insight, identity, its cessation, the origin of identity, and the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the stilling of suffering. And then the long-lived gods, so beautiful and famous, are afraid and full of terror like the other beasts when they hear a lion. We haven't transcended identity, it turns out we're impermanent. So they say when they hear the word of the perfected one, free and poised. So there ends the sutta. So I'll just sort of make a couple of remarks on the form of the discourse. So we're dealing here with a discourse in the Anguttara Nikaya 4s. So this is one of the collections of the early Buddhist teachings. And in this particular collection, that form that we just encountered is very common. So the sutta is often finished off with a set of verses that will summarize the contents of the sutta. Now, in this particular case, the verses refer to the Buddha in the third person, right? It begins by saying the Buddha, the teacher without a peer in the world, and so on. So it sounds like the verses actually aren't spoken by the Buddha, they're spoken about the Buddha. So these are probably added a bit later, maybe a little bit after the Buddha's life, as a way of summarizing the teaching. So it's worth noting this, and the reason why I point this out is because when you're reading the suttas, sometimes you come to these verses or come to these parts, and you're thinking, "Oh, what is this saying that's different from what's in the main part of the sutta?" Right? And I know that's how I would read them when I was first starting. I say, "Oh, they've got these verses. These are going to tell me something else which I'm not learning from the sutta." But very often they don't. Actually, very often they're just saying the same thing as you find in the sutta. Why? For memorization. This is all about backups. So this is a major thing in the suttas, right? Backups, backups, backups. Yeah? Repeating the information again and again because this was an oral tradition. So in case any word was forgotten, sentences were put in the wrong order, something like that, then you had the same message confirmed in another form, right? So that was how they would memorize things in those days, right? Fun fact, humans haven't changed all that much. And that's still how we memorize things today. Yeah? When we learn today, when we read, these days we don't read for memorization. Right? If you read a novel, you read a book or something like that, you read it for entertainment, you read it for, for the emotional response or for the engagement or whatever it is it's reading. But you don't read in order to be able to say, "Oh, I want to remember this passage later on." Right? But that's what they were doing in the Buddha's time. But if we do want to learn something, how do you learn it? Well, you repeat it. You go back and do it again and again and again. And that's how the suttas are structured. That's why they say the same things again and again. It's so you can remember it. And that's really useful. Why? Because when it is the dark of night and the lions are roaring and the skies are cracking open and the terror is upon you, you can't stumble in your bag to find your phone and look up Sutta Central to find the right sutta that you're going to need, okay? Or maybe you can, but you need something that's a bit more immediate. Yeah? You need to be able to remember the teaching, right, in your meditation at the time when you need it. You need it to be in your heart. That's why these teachings are repetitious. All right, so this is the first sutta for today. I'm going to 4.33, the Siha Sutta, about the lion's roar and about how terrifying it is when the Buddha teaches that there could be an end to all of this. When the Buddha teaches us, it's very uncomfortable. I think it's really important to acknowledge this because the Buddha's teaching is very challenging. And I thought of a saying the other day, if your spiritual path is not disturbing, it's not a path, it's a sofa. So there should be something about our spiritual path that challenges us, that this is what this is reminding us. Yeah? And you should, from time to time, look around yourself and say, what? And this is why coming here also is really good, because we get to leave behind all our comforts, leave behind our microwave, leave behind our nice sofa, leave behind the things that we might just take for granted. And you come and stay in your tent and you're like, oh, that's okay, actually. And those of us many of us were in Central Australia a few years ago, and we come here, we're like, oh, it's luxury. So, anyway. So that's why I really love this sutta, because it is that reminder of how, when you feel that way, because it's something that all of us will feel at one point or another. We'll feel challenged. We'll feel like, what's going on? We feel like just like that kind of, it's a kind of existential crisis. Like, what does any of this stuff mean anything? What am I doing this for? Why am I living in this house? Why am I doing this job? And the Buddha's teaching for letting go, and he's teaching for the ending of these things. And it's okay to feel that. Yeah? It's okay. It's a normal part of that spiritual path. And when the things that you hold on to and the things that you let go of, it evolves and it changes over time. But we need to keep getting challenged by things. So this is a sutta on the 5 future perils. And I thought this was a good one for our time spent here in meditation in nature. Mendicant, seeing these 5 future perils is quite enough for a wilderness mendicant to meditate diligently, keenly and resolutely for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved and realizing the realized. What 5? Firstly, a wilderness mendicant reflects, currently I'm living alone in a wilderness. While living here alone, I might get bitten by a snake, a scorpion or a centipede, and if I died from that, it would stop my practice. Notice that that's what he's worried about. If he gets bitten by a snake and dies, it'll stop him from meditating. I'd better rouse up energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. This is the first future peril. Okay? Obviously, this applies during this weekend. You might get bitten by a snake. You might be bitten by a scorpion. I'm just saying. Next one. I'm living alone in a wilderness. While living here alone, I might stumble and fall or get food poisoning, or my bile and phlegm or stabbing wind might get upset. And if I died from that, it would stop my practice. I better rouse up energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. Furthermore, they reflect, currently I'm living alone in a wilderness. While living here alone, I might encounter wild beasts, a lion, a tiger, a leopard, a bear, or a hyena, which might take my life. And if I died from that, it would stop my practice. I'd better rouse up energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. Furthermore, they reflect, while living here alone in the wilderness, I might encounter youths escaping a crime or on their way to commit one, and they may take my life. I just want to stop here and just kind of acknowledge the fact that delinquent teenagers were then a threat on a line with lions and tigers. Anyway, if I died from that, it would stop my practice. I better rouse up energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. And furthermore, alone in this wilderness, there are savage monsters that might take my life, and if they killed me, it would stop my practice. I better rouse up energy. So, bunyips. Perhaps. I don't know what other monsters we have around here. Rainbow serpents. Anyone know any monsters around the area? We should ask the staff if they know of any anyway. Okay, so this is the 5th future peril. Seeing these 5 future perils is quite enough for a wilderness mendicant to meditate diligently. Not for them to medicate diligently. Oh, I better take some Prozac, this is too stressful. No, to meditate diligently, keenly and resolutely for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. So this is one of the contemplation on the future perils. There are a number of these suttas on the future perils, each of them giving different things, dangers that might occur in the future. And all of them come back to that same message, that this is why we need to live well now. And we live in a time where there are even more future perils than ever before. And we have threats of climate change, we have terrible war going on at the moment. We have so many things that may or probably will affect us. Just last night I called my sister, and she's in Ballina, and she had to evacuate her home because of the floods. And so she was talking about how they're sort of starting to rebuild and starting to put the homes together, and everyone's sort of trying to make insurance claims and trying to get enough, all of that stuff you don't think about. But how many builders are there in that region to actually rebuild all the houses and all of those things? And as I was talking to her, I'm saying, well, I'm just sitting here at Dubbo, looking out at all of the black trees that were burnt in the fires a couple of years ago. And so fires, and then we had a little break for a pandemic, and now we have floods. So these things are very real, and they affect all of us. So this is why we're here. This is why we do our spiritual practice, because life is short, and we cannot guarantee. So why not spend the time that we have doing some meditation? Let us proceed. So now let's go to another sutta about animals. And not far from here in the enclosure we have some monkeys. So let's do a sutta about monkeys. Of course, if you're in India, of course, one of the things, in the modern world, we're so disconnected from these animals, right? But if you're in India all those years ago, they're just around, monkeys, and we sort of have this very sentimental attitude towards animals. I read a study once about. I was in a book, I think a book called From the Beast to the Blonde by Marina Warner, which is an excellent book. It's about the history of folk stories and fairy tales. And one of the things that she looked at was the history of teddy bears. Because teddy bears named after Teddy Roosevelt, apparently, yeah. And so, and what she pointed out was that before that time, if you looked in stories, and in the kind of the collective consciousness, bears were always ugly, smelly, dangerous creatures, which they kind of are also. Huh? And then they became sentimentalized, and you became like a cuddly thing that you could give to your kids, and then you have a teddy bear. What was the difference, right? Why did we move to a state of being able to sentimentalize animals that way? Well, the crucial thing was that we'd shot them all. They were all dead, so they weren't a threat anymore. So then we could be reminiscent about how nice it was, and we could look at the few remaining ones that were in the zoo and say, oh, isn't that cute? And it's easy to be sentimental about a lion when it's on the other side of the fence. Not so easy when you come across it in the wild. And this is an important thing that informs our relationships to animals. And you can see from the way that the sutta relates to different animals that he doesn't sentimentalize them, that they were there, they were part of the life, and they're sometimes dangerous, as we've seen. They're sometimes ugly, sometimes terrifying, sometimes beautiful, sometimes magnificent, and they're much more present, and the emotional content of them is much more real than, we tend to see it through this kind of almost sort of Vaseline-coated lens, where we can see these kind of, oh, aren't they cute? And, we put a nice little picture on our desktop wallpaper or something like that, and then we've got, it's so nice. And, yeah, I've never encountered an elephant in the wild myself, but again, the same thing, I lived in Thailand in the forest, but basically all the elephants are killed. Really, the only elephants you see in Thailand are in captivity. But I had friends who were in the forest in Sri Lanka, and they did encounter elephants in the wild. And they said that the main thing which is really uncanny about encountering an elephant in the wild is just how sneaky they are. That's what's scary about them. They're completely silent, and you would never know that they're there. And you just sort of turn around, and there it is. Anyway. Bhikkhus, in the Himalayas, the king of mountains, there are rugged and uneven zones where neither monkeys nor human beings can go. There are rugged and uneven zones where monkeys can go, but no human beings. And there are even and delightful regions where both monkeys and human beings can go. There, along the monkey trails, hunters set out traps of pitch for catching monkeys. Those monkeys who are not foolish and frivolous, when they see the pitch, avoid it from afar. You know what pitch is, right? Like tar. Yeah. So this is actually a version of the Aesop's fable. What are is it Brer Rabbit? The Aesop's fable of the tar, what do they call it? The tar baby, tar bear. Anyway, there's a Aesop's fable. Some of the Buddhist stories are shared in common with the stories which in the Western culture, which we've inherited as Aesop's fables. So these are sort of part of a sort of shared pool of storytelling around the world. Anyway, those monkeys who are foolish and frivolous when they see the pitch avoid it from afar, but a monkey who is foolish and frivolous approaches the pitch and seizes it with his hand. He gets caught there thinking, I will free my hand. He seizes it with his other hand. Then he gets caught there thinking, I'll free both hands. He seizes it with his foot. Then he gets caught. Then he thinks, I'll free both my hands and my foot. He seizes it with his other foot and he gets caught there. Thinking, I'll free both my hands and feet, he applies his muzzle to it. Guess what? He gets caught there. So the monkey, trapped at 5 points, just lies there screeching. And he'd meet with tragedy and disaster, and the hunter can do whatever he wants with him. The hunter spears him, pries him off that tarred block of wood, and goes wherever he wants. Like I said, the Buddha's not sentimentalizing it. Starts out like a funny story of a monkey. Gets dark very quickly. So that's what happens when you roam out of your territory into the domain of others. So, mendicants, don't do it. All right? Don't be like that monkey. Don't roam out of your territory into the domain of others. If you roam out of your own territory into the domain of others, Mara will find a vulnerability and get hold of you. So remember, the introduction to the story was that there are some regions where humans and monkeys can't go, some where monkeys can go but not humans, and some where both humans and monkeys can go. The point being that the monkeys would be better off staying in the places where the humans can't go. Yeah? So, but sometimes they come down, and that's when they get caught. So, what about for us? Yeah, for meditators, yeah, what is our own domain? So, what is not a mendicant's domain, but the domain of others? It's the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. What 5? Sights known by the eye that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds known by the ear, smells known by the nose, tastes known by the tongue, touches known by the body that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. This is not a mendicant's own territory, but the domain of others. You should roam inside your own territory, the domain of your fathers, the piti visaya. You should roam inside your own territory, the domain inside your own fathers, then Mara won't find a vulnerability or get hold of you. And what is a mendicant's own territory, the domain of the fathers? It's the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 satipatthanas. What for? When a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate observing an aspect of feelings, an aspect of mind, an aspect of principles, keen, aware and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. This is a mendicant's own territory, the domain of the fathers. All right, so this is one of the suttas in the Satipatthana Samyutta, that is the collected discourses on mindfulness meditation. And here, as we find quite a number of places in that collection, the Buddha illustrates and illuminates the teaching on mindfulness by giving a very memorable story. And you're not likely to forget that anytime soon, are you? It's a very memorable image. The monkey is stuck there. Yeah. And there's a number of stories in the Satipatthana Samyutta which are like that, very kind of very striking and very memorable stories. So the Buddha then goes on to illustrate so that if you're a meditator and you want to practice the Dhamma, you want to find freedom, you don't want to be stuck, then this is what you do. You practice mindfulness meditation. So the Buddha's pointing out that when we get involved in things in the world, that we get stuck to them and we can get attached to them. And this can happen in strong forms, right? So as you form, like, say, addiction, right? So you can get addicted to drugs or addicted to, whatever, and you're literally stuck in that and you can't get away from it. But even in milder forms, then it can still be something that can draw you in. And the thing with the pleasures of the world is that they have this kind of tempting quality that leads you on little bit by little bit. And the Buddha never said that you shouldn't enjoy these things. He never said that you shouldn't enjoy the good things that the world has to offer. But he just said to be moderate and content and restrained. And these are virtues that, well, they're virtues that are not really valued and promoted very much. So our motto as a society seems to be more. If there's a question, that's the answer. We have more. And if we can't have more, then we borrow. And we take so that we can have more. And especially, we take from the future, we take from the environment, we take from others, we take what we can so that we can get more. How many times do we see, like, an advertisement for moderation? Not a lot. They have that one, drink in moderation, don't they? Yeah. So the Buddha also recommended drinking in moderation. So for him, drinking in moderation was like 0. So, but yeah, more is our motto. Anyway, so we've come here for this. And we're already, look, I don't want to overemphasize this too much, because we're here for the weekend, we're here to have this experience, and we're all doing pretty well, okay, as far as the whole letting go things goes. We're living a simple life for these couple of days, and we get to experience what that's like, right? So this is good. We're already making those major steps. Now, the important thing is, well, what do we do? Right? It's not just that you just don't have things, but also how do you live? How do you spend your time? And so this is what the Buddha is recommending here, is the practice of mindfulness meditation. We've already done some meditation here today, and so this sort of gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about mindfulness and about the kinds of mindfulness meditation that the Buddha was teaching. So I'm going to say a few words on that topic for this session. Now, mindfulness has almost become a synonym for Buddhism these days, and I kind of regret a little bit the way that these things have happened, because everything has to be a mindful this and a mindful that, and it's all a bit much, really. But the Buddha was, for the Buddha, mindfulness was one factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? And so I don't know, I kind of think that in modern times people have said, oh, mindfulness, and you take mindfulness out of the Eightfold Path, and then you realize, well, actually, it's not just about meditation, but what about speech, for example? So then you have mindful speech. And you say, well, also, what about the job that you're living? So you have mindful livelihood. And then you have... And so you're gradually actually putting all of the bits of the Eightfold Path back in there. Well, okay, fine, but maybe not take it out in the first place, also another approach. Anyway, so there are 8 factors of the Eightfold Path, and each of those factors is just as important as the next. And I do believe that, I think that the emphasis on mindfulness in our modern world has been incredibly positive and transformative, and it's been an opportunity for Buddhist ideas and Buddhist Dhamma to completely transform the realm of especially psychology, therapy, and so on, where these ideas are present in a way that they simply weren't, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I also feel that we have the capacity, that there are so many things in Buddhism and the Buddha's teachings which could have an equally transformative effect in other areas that we haven't done. And just off the top of my head, right speech, right? Speech is such a crucial contemporary issue with social media, fake news, all of these kinds of things. And a lot of that stems from an approach to speech that starts with free speech in the sense that I should be able to say anything I want and never experience any consequences for it. Right? Rather than starting with the Buddhist idea of free speech, which is that I should take responsibility to ensure that my speech is actually going to make the world a better place. And if that was our foundational principle, that would have a huge effect in how the discourse in the world was carried out. That's one thing that we could bring in from Buddhism. Other things like, say, consciousness and AI. Right? So Buddhism's been talking about a conditioned and scientific theory of consciousness for thousands of years. So many different things that we could be introducing from Buddhism, and we could be making contributions. And not everything has to be about mindfulness all the time, is the point that I'm saying. Nonetheless, mindfulness is an important part of the Buddha's teachings, especially when it comes to the aspect of meditation. Now, what was the Buddha talking about when he talked about mindfulness? So mindfulness is one of the key characteristics of mindfulness is continuity. Mindfulness introduces an element of continuity. Mindfulness is closely related to the idea of memory. It stitches together the past and the future so that our mind isn't here one moment, there the next, and there the next. But our mind has a stream that makes sense, that coheres. Yeah? It connects. Think about, for example, how mindfulness or smriti plays a role in culture, or played a role in ancient Indian culture. The sacred scriptures, the Vedas, literally the knowledge, was memorized. And by memorizing the knowledge, you could pass it down from generation to the next. And that's how you formed a culture and a people, because you shared your body of knowledge through memory, and that's what bound us to our past generations, and that's what made us who we were as a people. This is one usage of the word smriti, or mindfulness. In Pali we say sati, in Sanskrit smriti. So the same word the Buddha used to talk about meditation, and that has that same role. It binds and glues together and makes our mind cohere in the sense that it is passing from the past to the present to the future, and keeping that smooth flow. So it has that aspect of continuity. One of the synonyms of mindfulness in Pali and Sanskrit is dharana. The word dharana. Dharana literally is used in the same sense to mean memory. Okay, so you can say to have smriti, it means memory, or you can say to have dharana also means memory. But dharana has a literal meaning to uphold something. Yeah? To dharana, to dhareti is to hold something up. So you could bear it in mind. Literally you have the same image in English, right? Same metaphor. We bear it in mind. Yeah? We dhareti, we hold it in our mind. That's the same thing as mindfulness, to hold something in our mind. Yeah? Now, it can be in the sense of like an idea, a scripture, a text. It can be the things that were said and done. So one of the definitions of mindfulness in the Suttas, it says that you can remember and recollect things that were said and done long ago. All right, so this is one of the aspects of mindfulness. Yeah? But in meditation, it comes to have that sense of having a continuity of present awareness. All right? A continuity of present awareness. And when I'm talking about this, I try to be very precise in my language, because some of the ways that we talk about mindfulness today are not exactly how the Buddha talked about it. For example, the Buddha never talked about present moment. And this is very weird, because like almost every meditation teacher today talks about being in the present moment. Actually, the present moment, in Pali, is Paccuppanakkhana, is a phrase or an idea which comes from a later Buddhist tradition. The Buddha didn't talk about the present moment. He talked about the present. He talked about being in the present. Now, is that completely different? No. Right? Is it like a contradictory thing that's like a completely different kind of idea? No. But it does have a slightly different nuance to it, right? It's slightly different. If you say to be present, is slightly different to say be in the present moment. Right? Being in the present moment is a bit tighter. It's a bit more narrow. Whereas being present is a bit more flexible. The present is more like a bell curve. It's more like a smear. Like even in quantum theory, it's kind of like that. The present's not like a line. It's more like a wave of probability. Yeah? And I think that's more like how we actually experience the present. I don't think that the present is cut and dried. I think the present is more like, I think we kind of blur into the future and blur into the past. Yeah? And I think that the shape of that bell curve can also change. Yeah? And part of that is also because our experience is mediated through our physiology, and none of that is instant. Right? I mean, it takes time for things to get from the ears to get to the brain. It takes time for the brain to process things. It takes time for the eye to... not much time, but a little bit of time, right? And so the experience is actually being formed as a process over time, yeah? None of which is instantaneous. So our experience is kind of organic and a bit loose. And the great Buddhist scholar David Kalapahana said that the present moment was like walking on a tightrope, whereas the present was like riding on a camel. All right? So we are trying to ride on the camel of the present. So it's a bit more loosey-goosey, a bit more, you've got room to wiggle on the back of a camel. Yeah? And it's a bit more relaxed. Yeah? It's a bit more relaxed. So walking on a tightrope is something that's very specialized, and you have to make a great effort to do that. Whereas riding on a camel, we can just enjoy the scenery while we're going along. So there's that different idea. Again, it's not like completely different, but it just gives you a bit of a different attitude when we're meditating. So rather than thinking of the present as being something which is very hard to attain and very narrow and very specific, the present is just what's here. That's all. This is what you're experiencing now. What's hard, actually, is the past and the future. That's what's hard. It's hard for our minds to go into the past. That actually takes a lot of effort and cognition and energy to send our mind into the past and to send our mind into the future. It's effortful, but we get so used to it that you don't realize that. But our minds are constantly going out and doing these things. This is why our minds tend to get exhausted, because we get into the habit of worrying about the future and dragging up the past. But remember, the past and the future themselves don't have any energy. They're not real, right? What's real is the present. And the energy of all of that, of all of those worries, all of those conditions, everything, all of that is in the present. And we are the ones who are creating the past. We are the ones who are dredging it up. We are the ones who are building the future. These are sankharas. In Buddhism, we have the word sankhara. It means an energy or an activity or an impulse. And so it's our impulses, sankharas in the present, that are creating the past and the future. But we don't see it like that. We see it as if we're subject to those things. We think, oh, all of these memories keep on happening to us. Right? But those memories don't happen to us. We create those memories. Yeah? And the reason that we think that they're happening to us is because we try to pretend to ourselves that we're not really responsible, because we would like not to be responsible, because it's easier to go through life imagining that things are happening to you rather than to go through life knowing that you're the one who's actually doing it. You are not the victim of your life. You are the protagonist of your life. You are the one who makes the choices. So, being mindful in the present, and the Buddha talked about this, when the Buddha talked about this, he used the word anupassi. So the word anupassi means to observe, anupassi. But it has a specific meaning in Pali, because the word passi is to see or to watch. The word anu means along with or continuously. Yeah? So I'm not sure if there's quite an English word that captures that exactly, but the idea is that you are continuing to contemplate. It's an ongoing observation. Yeah? You keep on watching something. Now, this is the idea of anupassi. This is why it's anupassi. I'm sure you've heard of vipassana, right? So vipassana is one of the aspects of Buddhist meditation as well. So vipassana has its own specific set of connotations. Again, they're not like completely different words with completely different meanings, but they're just nuances. But the nuance of vipassana has the idea of clear seeing. The nuance of anupassana has that idea of continuous seeing, to keep on watching. Now, this makes sense most easily when we think of it in the context of breath meditation, right? Breathing meditation. Right? What do? Well, we keep on watching our breath. That's it. That's what the Buddha meant by anupassi. That's what the Buddha meant by being in the present. Yeah? And now when the Buddha talked about the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 satipatthanas, he used this very characteristic construction, kaya kayanupassi viharati, which almost every translator will translate as saying that they observe or they contemplate a body in the body. And if you've read the Satipatthana Sutta in translations, I'm sure you're familiar with that idiom. It contemplates a feeling in the feelings, contemplates mind in the mind, contemplates Dhamma in the Dhammas. What does that mean? It's not obvious, is it? Right? And there are many, if you look at different books and talks and so on, everyone's given their talk about Satipatthana. It's one of the most overdetermined topics in Buddhism. That's why I don't talk about it all that much. I wrote a big, thick book on this topic many years ago, and since then I try to talk about other things when I can. Not for any other reason other than that's what everyone talks about. So it's good to talk about things that not everyone talks about. But so everyone has their opinion on what kaya kayanupassi means. So I will now give you the correct opinion, which is, as it happens, and I mean, you might be surprised, but as it happens, it also is my opinion. I mean, just one of those little coincidences that happens in life. So when the Buddha, first thing to understand is that when the Buddha was teaching, especially when he was teaching with things like this, so the Buddha's not trying to confuse us. He's trying to be clear. He's trying to give us a specific and clear and definite meaning, right? This is how the Buddha taught. So yeah, if you're reading some poetry or some occasional teachings, yes, you find the Buddha sometimes will say something mysterious, and then he'll walk out. And everyone's like, what's the Buddha talking about? And then they have this discussion, right? So sometimes he does do that to try to prompt discussion and so on. Some of the verses in the Dhammapada where he clearly was teaching in order to, stimulate discussion. One of the suttas where he says you should kill your mother and father and slay the Brahmin and then kill the tiger and then you'll be pure and free. So clearly he's not meaning that in a literal sense, right? There's clearly a metaphor, and you're meant to say what's going on, and there's an inquiry there. But when the Buddha was giving his key doctrinal teachings, Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, mindfulness, Eightfold Path, when he's teaching these central things, he wasn't teaching like that. He was teaching in a way that was definitive and clear, and he had a specific meaning in mind, right? So it's important for us, if we want to learn that, is to pay attention and try to learn from what the Buddha said exactly what the Buddha was talking about in that particular context. So what this idiom is, a body in the body, is a locative construction that essentially what it means is to look at one particular aspect of our body within all the different things that make up our body. So when the Buddha taught this meditation on body contemplation, he taught about contemplating the breath, one kind of meditation. He also taught about being mindful of your postures, right? Where your hands are, where your legs are, getting up, walking around. He talked about contemplating the different parts of the body. So looking at the head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, and so on. And this is another meditation you can do. He also talked about contemplating the elements. So you can look at the earth element in your body, look at the water element, and so on. He also talked about contemplating a dead body, right? Contemplating a corpse and decaying and turning into a skeleton and so on. And actually many other different aspects of contemplating the body. And the Buddha taught this in many occasions in many different ways. And so this is what this expression kaya kayanapasi means. It means contemplating a particular aspect of the body. So when we're doing meditation, we can't do all of those things at once. The Buddha gave us many different approaches to use for our meditation, and so we focus on one aspect for that particular meditation. And this is what is meaning by this is what the kaya kayanapasi meditation really means. And again, this is not like an inference really. This is quite clearly stated in the suttas. One of the suttas of the Buddha says that the breath is one of the bodies among the bodies. In other words, the breath is a certain aspect of the body, and that's what he means by kaya kayanapasi. So he actually explains what this thing means in the suttas. So we're contemplating an aspect of the body as the first of the kinds of mindfulness meditation. Now, why contemplate the body? Like, shouldn't meditation be about the mind? Right? When we come to meditate, we usually we feel anxious or we want to feel peaceful or something like that. And we're talking about mental things. We're talking about psychological things. So, any Buddhist meditation, any meditation that the Buddha taught, begins by being grounded in awareness of your body. This is one of the foundational characteristics of any early Buddhist meditation. And the Buddha's approach to meditation was always the same. It's always to start with simple things and then gradually move to more profound things. And this is something, again, is quite not contradictory, but quite contrasting with other approaches to meditation. So there were other meditators in the time of the Buddha, other different meditation traditions, and those meditation traditions might begin with something like, say, contemplation of the fact that my little self in here is the same as the cosmic self out there. Okay? That's a very profound contemplation, but you're starting with a very abstract place. The Buddha didn't want us to do that. He wanted us to start with something very, very simple. Why? Right? It's so important to walk, to be aware of where your feet are, to eat, to be mindful of your eating. Yeah? This is one of the things that was so puzzling when Western interpreters first came to Asia and first started taking an interest in Buddhism. And I know that especially when they went to Sri Lanka, that in many homes they would have a copy of the Satipatthana Sutta, and people would greatly revere this text as being a spiritual text, and it would be on their shrine and so on. And then people would ask, like, what's it talk about? Well, it talks about like going to the toilet and being mindful. Okay, and this is not what people expected from a spiritual scripture, right? But that's the nature of the Buddha's teachings. We start with those small things. In our spiritual life, it is so tempting to want to leap over all of the basic stuff and go to the end. Very, very tempting. And the Buddha talked about so many cool things. Like we've literally got the dimension of infinite consciousness. We've got the cessation of perception and feeling. We've got the remainderless end of all conditioned phenomena. We've got all of these things that the Buddha talked about that are so profound and so intriguing. And they make it, and it's very tempting to have a lot of very strong opinions about those things, and to go onto internet and forums and express those opinions in very definitive manners. So that's okay, right? It's okay to have an interest and to try to understand those profound things. But that's not what the Buddha emphasized. What the Buddha emphasized was getting a grounding on those simple and fundamental things. And this is what's being emphasized in this simile. Yeah? For the monkey, just like for a meditator, make sure that you keep your priorities straight. Make sure that you focus on those things that are really going to matter. And so the foundation of that is always the contemplation of the body. Now the other kinds of mindfulness meditation, feelings, awareness and principles, I'll just briefly mention those now, and then we'll just do a little bit more meditation before lunch. So the easiest way to understand, these four kinds of mindfulness meditation cover a very broad spectrum of experience. But primarily, they do focus on meditation. That's why I translated it as the kinds of meditation. Traditionally, it's translated as something like the foundations of mindfulness or something like that. But the main focus is on meditation. And Satipatthana, primarily in the suttas, means what do you do when you sit down to meditate? Right? I mean, of course, we can apply it more broadly than that. Right? I'm not saying it's only that. I'm saying that's the main focus. The main focus is to sit down and watch your breath, right? Or to do one of the different contemplations. Now, let's take the breath as being the main paradigm of mindfulness meditation. We sit down, we watch our breath, we can become aware of the physical feeling of the breath, the physical touch of the air. Now, in the suttas, the Buddha didn't say, concentrate on the breath. He didn't say, focus on the breath. He said, so sato va asasati sato pasasati. Mindful, breathe in. Mindful, breathe out. Again, it's not completely different, right? To say breathe in mindfully is not completely different from saying focus on your breath, okay? So I'm not saying it's completely different, but there's a slightly different nuance. Because when people teach meditation these days, think about what is the subject of the verb. Right? The subject of the verb is I'm going to focus, I'm going to concentrate. Whereas in the Buddha's day, the subject was the breath itself. The breath is the active verb. The breath is what's happening, and we are being mindful with that. Let the breath take care of us. There's a beautiful simile where the Buddha talks about how when we have the hindrances in the mind, it's like when you have leaves on the path and the wind will come along and sweep them and blow them away. And it's the breath which is blowing away the hindrances, rather than us which is doing it. And that's just more kind of worldly thinking. So, mindfully breathing. When we do that, we're aware of the breath, we're aware of the physical sensation of the breath. What happens next? It starts to feel nice. When I say next, it might take a while. You have to be patient, okay? But it starts to feel nice. It starts to feel pleasant. We start to feel this sense of joy that comes through the breath. Not a sense of joy that's separate from it, not something else that happens, but it's like the breath itself has this feeling of pleasure inside it, which it always had, but we never quite had the patience to notice it. And the breath itself has this soothing, gentle, pleasant feeling, actually, which is soothing us all the time. Actually, it's reminding us you're alive. Yeah? Reminding us you're alive. It's calming us down all the time. And when we become still in meditation, we start to see this. There's this sukha, this pleasure in the breath. And this is when we're starting to move to that second aspect of mindfulness, which is the contemplation of feelings. Becoming aware of the feelings inside the breath. And as we continue with that deepens, then what we call the hindrances, which are the obstacles to clarity in the mind, fade away. The hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. So these are the things that cloud and obstruct the mind. And the further we go in meditation, the quieter these things become, and the more the mind becomes clear. And I talked about this a little bit before, when I talked about the consciousness and the clarity of the mind in meditation. So when we start to become aware of the clarity of the mind in meditation, we're moving to the third of these satipatthanas, right? The conflation of chitta. And the last one, the contemplation of Dhammas, without going again into too much detail, but essentially what this means is the understanding of cause and effect. Understanding how this all works. Understanding why does your mind become pure or why does it not? Why do you feel happy or why do you not? Previously you saw the happiness, you saw the purity, or you saw the lack of those things, but you didn't see why, you didn't see where does this come from. Right? So Dhammanupassana is about understanding causality and ultimately understanding the Four Noble Truths. So this is how that spectrum of the four kinds of mindfulness meditation, the four satipatthanas, can evolve through the practice of breath meditation, which includes all of those. As I said, it's a vast practice, and there are many other ways of doing it as well. Right? You don't have to do breath meditation. There are plenty of other ways of approaching it if you want to do it that way. But the general pattern of how you do it will follow a similar kind of outline. Right? And so there are many different aspects and many dimensions of these practices. But that's the general outline, that we start with contemplation of the body, we experience those different feelings, we're aware of the mind in its different states and becoming pure, and then we understand the cause and effect as it relates to that whole process. That's the outline of Satipatthana and how it works.